So this debate focuses on the motion, playing video games leads to increased levels of crime, including violence and antisocial behaviour. Our two main speakers today are the journalist and social commentator, Susanna Fiorella, who will be arguing in favour of the motion that playing video games does lead to increased levels of crime. And speaking against the motion, we have the psychologist and blogger Michael Connolly, who is an expert on the psychological and social effects of technology. Welcome to both of you. There will be an opportunity for the audience to say what they think after we've heard from Susanna and Michael. And it'll be interesting at the end to see whether you're convinced by their arguments and the supporting evidence that you've heard. So let's start with arguments in favour of the motion. Susanna Fiorella.
Thank you. I'd like to start by asking two questions. What are video games for? And what are the effects on the people who play them? In answer to the first question, well, actually, there are a number of possible answers. From a commercial perspective, you could say that video games are a product. They're there to make money for the companies that produce them. And they do this very successfully. But of course, there's more to it than that. We live in an age when people work fewer hours than at any time in the past, and therefore have much more leisure time. Children and young people in particular have a lot of free time. Playing video games fills some of that time for many of these people. Whereas in the past, they may have spent that time working or studying, reading or playing sport. I'll come back to this point later, but I think what it tells us is that video games exist mainly to fill up people's time. Apart from that, they don't make a useful contribution to people's lives. Indeed, as I'm about to argue, most of the effects they have on people, especially younger people, are negative. And at the extreme end of negative, video games can lead to crime. So this brings us to the second question. What are the effects? I have to say, first of all, that there's no absolutely clear answer to this question. The evidence is not as strong as, say, the evidence for the negative effects of smoking on health. But there appears to be evidence, quite convincing evidence, to suggest that many of the effects of playing video games are negative, and that potentially they can lead to antisocial attitudes and behaviour, even criminal activity. Let's look at some of these points now. My first point is that playing video games is not a productive activity. I said that video games exist essentially to fill up leisure time, and they certainly take up a great deal of time for the people who play them. But while they're playing, they're not producing anything useful, they're not achieving anything, they're not being sociable, building friendships and networks, and they're not out there learning new skills and doing new things. So game playing is clearly unproductive. From that point of view, it's a complete waste of time. Moving on to my second point, you could argue that game playing improves players' cognitive skills, their ability to think and react. But research has shown that any improvement in cognitive skills is very limited, as Sims and Mayer found in 2002. In other words, if you play a game where you have to manipulate an object, you might be able to manipulate a similar object more effectively in real life, but you probably won't be able to transfer this skill to other kinds of objects and contexts. My third point is important, and it goes like this. It's widely believed that playing violent video games can lead to violence in real life. Admittedly, this can be a difficult point to prove, but there is research to suggest that after playing violent and aggressive video games, people may behave in an aggressive way. And if more people are behaving aggressively, this has a negative effect on society generally. aggression becomes more common in society as a whole. Bensley and Van Einwick found evidence of this in their 2001 analysis of 28 research studies. It applied particularly to younger children aged from 4 to 8 years old. Another piece of research links video games halls in Southeast Asia with recruitment for criminal gangs. These video games halls are one place where established gang members can find new members. This research is by John Vagg, published in the British Journal of Criminology. Another related point is the research that has been done into antisocial effects on children. The work of Gentile and others found increased levels of video game playing were linked to antisocial effects in children, even children who weren't previously behaving in an aggressive way. This suggests that playing video games is linked to antisocial behaviour, which may include violent behaviour. So it would seem that there is some evidence to suggest that antisocial behaviour can lead to violent behaviour and then to criminal activity. One last point. Playing video games can, like other activities, be addictive. The more you play, the more you want to play. I've seen children play games literally for hours, and the next day they want to go back and spend even more time doing the same thing. And if you try to stop them, they get moody or angry. I'm sure that many of you have seen similar examples of this kind of effect. And addiction is of course linked to criminality. Addicts often behave aggressively when they don't get their fix. And in extreme cases, some commit crimes to fuel their addictions. So, video gaming and criminality, in my view, they're closely linked.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Well, some important points there and lots to think about. I know that Michael has a number of points that he would like to make, but I'm going to ask him first to respond to what Susanna has said.
Thank you. Yes, as you say, Susanna raises a number of interesting points. What I'd like to do, I think, is respond to these points one by one. Now, I've read the same research as Susanna, and I think it's interesting that we don't agree on the evidence. So firstly, the point about game playing being an unproductive activity, a waste of time, I believe were the words you used. Now, this may be a widely held opinion, but to be convincing, it needs more evidence. Also, if playing computer games is a waste of time, then you might as well say that watching television is a waste of time. Reading magazines is a waste of time. Chatting to your friends online is a waste of time. Maybe they are, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence for this. It's just an opinion. So you could also say that all these activities are perfectly valid and useful. Okay, Susanna's second point, that players' cognitive skills are only improved in a very limited way. Now, there's actually very little evidence for this. Other research seems to support the idea that gaming can have a significant effect on cognitive ability. For example, there's an article published by a team of researchers from the psychology department at the University of Illinois. The title of this is The Effects of Video Game Playing on Attention, Memory and Executive Control. And the authors found some very important cognitive differences between expert game players and non-gamers. Now, there's no doubt that expert game players performed better in certain areas. They track objects more effectively. They identify changes to objects. Their reaction times are faster, and they can switch more quickly from one task to another. Now, I could give you more examples, but let's move on to Susanna's third point, that playing violent video games can lead to violence in real life, to a more aggressive society. I think we have to be careful here. As Susanna said, a lot of people believe this to be true, but I don't agree with the interpretation of the research done by Bensley and Van Eenwijk. I don't think it's as simple as you suggest, Susanna. Yes, they did find that playing an aggressive video game was often followed by aggressive behaviour, but this behaviour was very brief. And more importantly, the research only identified this behaviour in children aged 4 years to 8 years, not in older children. In other words, it's not certain whether the effect is the same in other groups of gamers of different ages. Also, the research done by John Vaig doesn't conclude that playing video games leads to violent behaviour. What he is actually saying is that some gang members go to places like gaming halls to find the kind of people who might be persuaded to join their gang. This is not the same thing. It's not playing video games that leads to gang culture. It's the places where young people play the games. This is like saying that drug dealers try to sell their drugs to people in cafes and bars, so going to cafes and bars leads to drug use. Now, we must be careful about working out causes and effects. A context shouldn't be mistaken for a cause. Susanna said that playing video games is linked to antisocial behaviour in children. I'd like to say that I think this is her strongest point. There's definitely plenty of evidence to support this view, although the evidence is not consistent. The piece of research Susanna quoted is quite convincing, although there's other research which has found that antisocial effects in children are not significant. But, as I say, there's quite a substantial body of evidence which suggests a possible link between playing video games and a degree of antisocial behaviour. Moving on to Susanna's fifth point now. I'm sorry, but this point is really not very convincing. Think about what she said. I've seen children play for hours. Well, I've seen a lot of interesting things too, but that doesn't make them scientific facts. Kids get moody when they can't do what they want. Now, is that really news? Do kids who don't play video games not get moody? This is just personal experience. Maybe playing video games can be addictive, but where's the evidence? Another point, addiction is linked to criminality. I don't think so. It's a big step from playing a video game to committing a crime. If you're going to make claims like these, you must provide real evidence, not just a generalization with no support. Susanna, I know that you'll want to come back at me on all of this, but let me just say a couple of more things, if I may.